Hey everyone, we are coming up on the last 3 weeks of the LCS spring regular season, and I want to talk about what my expectations were for Cloud9 coming into the year and what they look like right now, and why I think those have changed a fair amount. I ranked Cloud9 fifth in my preseason power rankings back in December, once we knew the full roster for all the teams and all those kinds of things. But I said they had a ceiling of first, but I had them fifth because I also thought they had a very low floor, and I thought there were a lot of things that could potentially go wrong for this team. Of course, this was a projection out to the end of summer, and we're only, a little more than halfway through the spring regular season, so it's very early to be reviewing all of this and saying, hey, did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? But I think in Cloud9's case, it's not too early to say I got some things wrong on this team, and they're looking a lot better than a fifth place preseason power ranking would suggest. They're already considered a top 2 LCS team. It's really between them and Team Liquid. Of course, the C9 fans are all going to say Cloud9 are clearly first. The Team Liquid fans say it's TL first. Where you stand on that doesn't really matter. The point is Cloud9, I think, pretty widely accepted top 2 team in the LCS right now. So why was my confidence in their project so low coming in? Even though I said they had a ceiling of first and that if things worked out, I thought they could win the league. I did place them fairly low. And why was that? So I want to talk about what those reasons were and then what I've seen so far and how that kind of interacts with what my expectations were. So I did not lack confidence in C9 because of LS and his ideas and how well I thought they'd translate into the league and stuff. Obviously LS was a factor in any expectations anybody had for Cloud9 coming into the year, right? It's an unavoidable factor and it was very important, but that wasn't really, maybe you could say that I thought, given LS's sometimes controversial presentation and history, I thought one of the things that could go wrong with this team is there could be some drama that derails things, and the team just doesn't click internally. I guess there has been some drama, but that's not really, I would say, other than the day he was released and the loss they had there, you could probably draw a connection between like the drama of the day and the results on that day, but I think that hasn't really been a factor either way, and I don't think that was an important core to my decision making on what I decided about them coming in. As a bit of a side note on this, I hope people are seeing over the past few weeks that Cloud9's high ceiling and how well they're performing wasn't just because of LS's ideas. It wasn't LS's team is great and the non-LS version of C9 can't be that good. You look at the quality of the team's roster, which LS does deserve a share of the credit for, maybe a large share for convincing T1 to get to allow them to bring in Berserker, for convincing Summit to come in, stuff like that. But the team is good, even if LS isn't directly working with them, and they were good while he was, right? So I think you can kind of take LS, you can set him on the side of this conversation and address that kind of in its own way, but that's not really what the conversation as a whole is about. I knew that Summit and Blabber were great, and I had high expectations for them coming in, and they've delivered on those expectations. But where my concerns started was Fudge's role swap. To me is a factor it was pretty dubious. I had a lot of concerns about the role swap because as a top laner, my understanding or characterization of Fudge was kind of just gets through the lane, mostly survives lane, and then comes online in kind of the mid late game team fights and contributing really well 5v5. If you really, really boil it down, it's super simple, which is too simple, but that was what it was. I thought he struggled sometimes with, managing his waves to avoid vulnerability. Sometimes if he was working with Blabber specifically on a gank setup or something like that, it could work out really well. But I thought in mid lane, there'd be a little less opportunity for that. I thought direct 1v1 laning skill would be a larger factor than it was in top lane. But, I think even though he wasn't a lane dominant top laner and he's not a lane dominant mid laner so far, and I don't expect him to become one, the LCS mid pool has not been punishing to him that way. It's not full of a lot of aggressor dominant players. You don't have Jizuke here. You have Jojo Pion, who has not, he's still just a few months into his career, and he's not as lane dominant as Jizuke was, or quite as wild in that way. You've got, Bjergsen coming in to replace Jensen. You've got the overall mid pool in the LCS, I think, is not a very punishing one in terms of 1v1 laning. And Fudge has rounded into form fine. He's handling that. It's not really been a problem to as large of an extent. I don't think it's been a problem in general, and definitely not a problem to the extent that I kind of feared it might be. And his mid game and his team fighting have been good as they were as a top laner as well. I think that's where he's really delivered and contributed quite a bit. His versatility as well, being willing to play different kinds of champions, he brought that in from the top lane. So I think, to summarize it down, his profile as a mid laner has been very similar to his profile as a top laner. Unsurprising, he's the same player. He's versatile, he lanes very conservatively and gets through it and then says, hey, it's mid game, now it's my turn, and he comes online with kind of team fighting and so on. So I think, Fudge's outcomes in his role swap so far and continued progression have been on the high side of what I expected. Berserker, I had some concerns with how passive he looked. And if you watched my VOD review of him or have heard some comments about that, his play in LCK Tier 2 was very tentative, very cautious. He wasn't taking very many risks at all. On the other hand, I saw great mechanics, great reaction time, knew how to play his champions. I just thought his mindset seemed to have some concerns for me. I've heard others comment, Emily Rand especially, that she thought it seems to have been that he wasn't fully trusting his teammates in the T1 Challenger team, and he was laying back because of that. And he's really addressed all of those concerns coming into the LCS. He's been much more aggressive. It's generated a lot of comment, not just from me. And he's really addressed that concern. He's been willing to step up for plays. He's been willing to play more assertively. And, of course, all the mechanics and reaction times and positioning and stuff like that has still been there, which I expected it to be. So that was a concern that has not panned out as a real problem or a concern. It's actually turned much more in the other direction in a positive. And now, I would say the biggest reason that I had some real concerns or fears for Cloud9 was Winsome. I avoided too much direct comment about Winsome in my comment coming into the year pretty intentionally, because I don't like to be too negative. But now looking back and seeing how well he's played so far, I think it's worth kind of being a little more forthcoming about what my expectations were. I VOD reviewed several of his games, I don't know, anywhere between 6 to 10, I think, before I did my preseason power rankings. And I wouldn't just say I was unimpressed, I was concerned. He looked quite poor to me. He looked like a player who didn't deserve to be promoted into LCK Tier 2. If I was watching him in Academy, I'd say, yeah, I'm not really gonna. He hasn't caught my eye for any specific reason. The things that I did notice about him were generally mistakes. So when you combine that with my approach to roster building, which is very much that the weakest link is a very big concern in roster building. I think 4 great players and 1 very poor player are unlikely to make a good team. I'd rather have 5 solid players than a couple of stars and a couple of weak links. I think that that has generally been proven to be true in my perspective on team building, especially if you have high level aspirations. And so when I had very large concerns about Winsome and how good he was going to be, or rather how bad he was going to be, I thought that could really take the team down. But Winsome has come in, and I'd say he's been adequate. He's gone kind of unpunished in the LCS. I'm not going to come in and say, I can't believe that I thought he was going to be trash, and instead he's a top 3 support in the LCS or something like that, because I don't think that's true. I think he's been, he's been kind of adequate. He hasn't been throwing games to me. He hasn't been consistently throwing lanes or stuff like that. I won't say that he's come in and been like a top half LCS support, but he has he's gone kind of unpunished. He's been definitely a lot better than I expected, because my expectations were just so low. And I think he's continuing to improve. And so, given that he is still quite inexperienced and that he came in performing at a much higher level than I hoped and has a lot more room that he can continue to grow, and if you give the coaching staff credit for that and give him, credit for being able to already improve a lot and continue to keep doing so, that does a whole lot for my expectations and understanding of Cloud9's level, because it's shored up what I thought would be their weakest link. So when you put all that together and update kind of my expectations, obviously I did give Cloud9 a ceiling of first. I thought they could win the LCS even with all those concerns. And so I still believe they can win the LCS. I don't know that I wouldn't currently. I think Team Liquid to me is still power ranked above them, and I said that last week. And I think TL have the potential to keep improving at the same rate, or or enough to not let C9 overtake them, but C9 have the potential to overtake them to beat any of the other teams in the LCS. I would say their floor, obviously, is much higher than I thought it was coming into the year. I'd probably put their floor at 4th right now. If something really catastrophic happens, maybe somebody could argue for a floor of 5th, but I think that's pretty that's pretty worst case scenario. I think Team Liquid, 100 Thieves, and EGL have the potential to beat Cloud9. Right now, I would continue to power rank Cloud9 as the second best team at the moment in the league, but I can't really see them falling outside of that top 4. And I feel at this point they're most likely going to be one of the teams that goes to Worlds. Whether that's first, second, or third, we'll have to see. There are 3 more weeks left in this regular season. We've got to see them in a best-of-5 run in the playoffs, which could bring in a lot of new information. And maybe when teams prepare more specifically against Winsome or against, against the way Fudge Lanes or something like that, maybe they'll find something else and expose it, or maybe Cloud9 will continue to bring in more wrinkles and continue to overachieve what I thought they would coming in. So those are all my thoughts on kind of what I got wrong about Cloud9 coming in, or what my fears were and how they've been addressed so far. And, I always like to see teams overperform expectations, overperform my own expectations. So I've been glad to see it. I don't mind admitting when I got something wrong, but I thought the context around what I thought might be interesting. So I know a lot of you are going to come in and say, I knew they were going to be the best team in the league from the very start, and I can't believe you didn't. And others are going to say, I still don't believe in them. That's the nature of fandom, and I'm happy to hear all of it in the comments. So have at it, and thanks for listening. Thanks for watching and supporting my content. I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and check out the channel memberships if you want to get access to custom emojis, special roles in the Oracle's Elixir Discord, and other perks.